Welcome back, everyone. Nearly 6 years ago, Darkher released Realms, and it was my best album of 2016. Now here in 2022, we have The Buried Storm, Darkher's second full-length album, and I am going to review it for you, give you my thoughts. So let's dig into it. The Buried Storm by Darkher. So those unfamiliar with Darkher, I can't remember how she came onto my radar. I believe it was in 2016, and I immediately picked up the debut EP along with Realms, and I quickly fell in love with the band. I started digging through the vocalist Jayn's past musical career and discovered a pretty interesting lineage. The band before Darkher was a band called The Steels, and previous to that, Jayn was like a guest vocalist on a number of singles. Darkher is best described as doom metal or dark folk metal. I would say all of those terms apply. It has a very Icelandic feel, even though Jayn resides in the countryside of England. There are elements of like a black metal-esque like lyricism and tone that I think would appeal to fans of like your darker metal, progressive metal, and then like probably fans of like neofolk. Darkher is on the Prophecy label, which I believe is a German label. U.S. shipments are sent as imports. I so fell in love with Darkher that when I was struggling to decide on which artist independent artist, musical artist, I was going to support through Patreon. Once I discovered that Darkher had a Patreon, I became a patron of her band. So maybe I'm a little biased in my review, so bear that in mind, but I do believe The Buried Storm is as equally impressive as Realms, though there are definitely some differences between the two albums. As I said earlier, it's been about 6 years. The difference I feel between Realms and this album, I might have to revisit Realms, but I feel like this album, specifically The Buried Storm, is probably conceptual by design. It feels like a very linear story, and I feel like possibly that Jayn, the vocalist, who was the primary songwriter, or is the songwriter, probably imbued a lot of her personal life into the lyrics, though in a very metaphorical sense. I feel there are hints of that throughout the liner notes and the lyrics. Not knowing anything about Jayn's personal life aside, I do feel like there are indications that this album was a sort of exorcism or birth, rebirth, or death and rebirth for her on a personal level, and she emerges at the end of this album as a fresh soul. And that's my take on the album as a concept. Lyrically, the song titles sort of tell the story, and it has a very nautical. I had flashes of the movie The Lighthouse when I was listening to this. There's like siren songs. There's a choir of haunting vocals throughout. The use of a cello and a violin especially imbues a haunting, ghostly element to the record that is inviting and also frightening. Oddly enough, as I was listening through the album on my second and third pass through, I started to imagine if Portishead had been influenced by metal instead of jazz, this may be what they sound like. There were moments with Jayn's vocals where I could hear similarities to Beth Gibbons and how distant, and I hate to keep using the word haunting, but like a sort of distant, echoey, phantasmal sort of quality to it. And I could hear that on certain elements and certain songs. So with that, I'm going to start discussing some of the songs. So the album opens with Sirens Nocturne. It's an inviting wail built around or wrapped around a haunting and swelling cello violin accompaniment. It's a gorgeous piece, and it's very Darkher sounding in that it has this stripped down but bewitching sort of quality. And I think that the addition of the cello and the violins throughout this album really adds a quality that Realms didn't have. Realms sort of was, it felt like a war. Like it could be very bombastic, very abrupt and brooding and dark. This album is dark, and it's definitely melancholy throughout, but the bombastic nature of it comes in much smaller flourishes, where Realms was more seething and venomous. It sort of is like a beckoning to the jagged shore. Lowly Weep is like our moment of impact and the aftermath of that crashing against the rocks. And it's also on this track that we venture into the heavier Nordic feel that exhibits Darkher's ability to bite. It's the most reminiscent of Realms is on this track, and Lowly Weep is it's a dynamic piece. It really grabs you from the onset because of the cello and the violin, and you're carried into this sort of wanting release, and then you get thrust against the drums and the percussion and the guitar, and it just incredible track. It's where Darkher is probably most known by fans, and will really appeal to like I said, progressive metal, folk metal, dark metal fans. A third track is Unbound, and it's relatively short, and it's very melancholy piece, and it's propped upon an acoustic guitar and Jayn's atmospheric vocals. Again, I need to revisit Realms. I don't remember Jayn's vocals being so ghostly. And I don't mean that in that they're not strong. I mean it in a sense that it's phantasmal almost. It's almost like an aria of lamentation. I struggle to describe Jayn's vocals throughout this album because I hate to keep using the same words over and over. My vocabulary isn't that great, but it's just a very haunting piece. This album throughout is very, very haunting. So our next track, Where the Devil Waits, it's an acoustic folk ballad. It's packed with an eerie chorus. It feels like it's collecting souls at a dark forest edge. Just that's the sense that I get. And I'm already spinning this narrative in my head about the story. We have this shipwreck. We have these sailors that were coaxed to the shore by these sirens, and they smash against the shore, and we have all of these tragic loss, and you have these wandering souls. And I feel like Where the Devil Waits is that beckoning of darkness at the edge of the forest to sort of trap those souls and keep them locked in to this forever repeating tragedy. Our next track is Love, Sudden Death, and this one is a slithering and undulating neo-folk type percussive rhythms. This track, Jayn's vocals have a very striking clarity, more than I ever recall on any previous Darkher track. And this is where I got my first flash of Beth Gibbons. I heard elements of Portishead, and I heard, you know, the darker elements, and then I had recollections of some of the videos I've seen that Jayn filmed in the woods around her home, doing these stripped down versions of her songs in this enchanting forest around her house. And it really beckoned me back to those moments that came after Realms. The next track is The Seas. And that, again, it has an undercurrent that sort of ebbs and flows. And it's paired with cellos. And the cellos are very mournful. And it feels like a lamentation, like a prayer sent into the darkest depths, asking for redemption. It's a very haunting, I keep using that word, but it's a very haunting track. And next we have Immortals. And I think that sort of furthers the redemption narrative from The Seas. It comes to full fruition here. I had visions of like the enigma of ravens and how they're associated with darkness, but they're also paralleled with great magic and knowledge. There's a quality to Darkher's tracks that have a very magical nature to them. Spiritual, magical, whatever your belief system is. I think her music taps into that, and her vocals and her voice, especially with the cellos and the violin, sort of draw that to the surface and really taps into your spirituality. And then the last track on standard editions, the vinyl and the standard edition CD, is Fear Not My King. And this sort of encapsulates all the elements that fans of Darkher associate with the band. Probably this last track is the one I struggle with the most, because I feel like it sort of leaves an incomplete page musically. I expected Darkher to close in much the same vein as Lowly Weep, and instead this track is a little bit different. Though lyrically I think it closes the narrative, musically it feels anticlimactic. And maybe that's by design, and I'm missing the point. Maybe this leaves the page open for another story to be told, or the next chapter. And if this is a metaphor for life events, then perhaps, you know, that was the intention of leaving that story musically unfinished. The Deluxe Edition, which you see here, this is a Deluxe Edition CD. It has 3 acoustic tracks. Slowly Weep. It's still punchy and gnashing. The cello and acoustic guitar are pernicious, and the clarity of them here is only outmatched by its eeriness, and it's the eeriness of Unbound, the next acoustic track. It's short, but it's just dripping with dread. And then lastly, our last acoustic track is Love, Sudden Death. And again, this is very reminiscent of those forest performances that Jayn did following Realms, and something that anyone that followed Darkher after Realms would be very familiar with. Just her wandering enchanted locations while strumming an acoustic guitar and performing material from the EP and Realms. It just evokes a stunning beauty. So is paired well with the sessions for that album, because like the beauty of those two things together, the location and the music are very well accompanied together. Unlike Realms, and maybe because Realms was my initiation into Darkher, The Buried Storm took me a little bit longer to find my footing in. Though it is very much a Darkher album, it also has noticeable differences. It's not appealing to anyone, really. Darkher, or Jayn, is making the music and writing the lyrics that are important to her, which, as a fan of her creativity, choose to accept or not accept. I jumped, with both feet in. I pre-ordered everything I could because, again, her last album was my favorite album of 2016. First I got were these cards, and I think Jayn is the photographer of 2 of them, and someone else took the third photo, the one that has her in it. I could be wrong with that, but she signed them, dated them, and these are really lovely little collector's item. And that's Got Enchanted Forest. So I have this one as well. Really beautiful. I'll look up the notes on the Patreon and put a link to the photographer. I think it was a different photographer for the photo of Jayn. And then this piece right here, it's from the same session. It's a little bit larger. Each one's titled. Very, very happy to have those. It's a nice collector's piece. And then they came, pardon me for that. They came with this envelope right here. They're stamped with her logo. I'm gonna do the album last because it has some components. So this is the deluxe edition of the CD, and this is filled with photos that Jayn took. So this is the album right here, and then it's filled with lyrics and photos. And she did a deluxe edition for Realms as well. I think that's a really beautiful tradition. I hope that she keeps up with future editions. So it's a lovely book. It's about the size of a 7-inch record. Gorgeous photos. I just love landscape in black and white and foggy, gorgeous England countrysides. And then this is a bonus disc. These are the 3 acoustic tracks that I was telling you about. So that is the deluxe edition of The Buried Storm. Prophecy. And this is the vinyl. This is a matte cover. It's gorgeous. You can kind of see the logo there. I would get that tattooed, honestly. And the inside, I'm trying not to set anything on fire. And the back cover. So I purchased the version. I think there is a black vinyl version. My version I got is, I think it's supposed to be smoky. You can kind of see. It seems like anytime I get it, like a special version, like the one that's photoed is like this remarkable. That's kind of cool, right there. It looks like antlers, sort of. But usually, like, yeah, I'm usually the one who gets like the poorest version of the gorgeous, pictured, you know, marbled, whatever. Mine will have like 2 lines of color in it. I'm usually that lucky. So it came with this, which is the lyrics. This is also the picture sleeve. It came with a poster, which is like a 4-panel poster. Again, trying not to set it on fire. There is no download card, but Prophecy did send me a download code to Bandcamp. So I do have a digital version of it thanks to Prophecy, so I love that. Prophecy does a really great job with their products. I should research some more of their acts. Most of the acts that they carry do follow in the black metal, dark metal, folk metal genres, and that can be a little hit or miss for me. There's just something about Darkher. It's the more folkish elements to it, and I think it's Jayn's vocals, honestly, just really appeals to me. I gravitate towards darker leaning acts, so I definitely recommend this album. I recommend both of her albums and the EP. there's not a single song that I've been disappointed by on any of her material. Then you can go sort of down the rabbit hole and find her Instagram and find her YouTube videos, and then if you really love it, support her on Patreon like I do. So yes, I definitely recommend The Buried Storm. It may be my favorite album of the year. I'm at a point, it seems like I buy 75% represses anymore and 25% like new material. If I don't find out about a band from Scotty or Pedro, I feel like I don't find out about it anymore. I feel like I'm always buying represses or old stuff. So again, I don't remember how I fell into Darkher. I don't know if it was a recommendation from someone, but it's been a love affair since finding it, and I hope I'm not waiting another 6 years for the next album, but if I have to wait, I won't wait. So pick it up. Again, it's through Prophecy, and I don't know if there's any American distribution on this yet, so if you're in the States, you may have to pay exorbitant shipping, but it's worth it, honestly. You know, like I said, I don't buy a lot of new stuff, but I had to have this, so I'm so glad I did. So that's it for the video. If you guys have any comments, if you know Darkher, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the album and on the band. If it's something new to you and you fall in love with it, let me know that as well, because I'd love to hear that. And big shout out to Jayn. Thank you for the Patreon. Thank you for being an artist that communicates with her fans. And thank you for another incredible album. I feel blessed. So enjoy.